Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Ground and Pound Podcast, the show where, as always, we're hitting you with them elbows of knowledge. And UFC Fight Night, Brandon Moreno taking on Lona Kavanagh is here. And as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Carlos. What's happening, Carlos?
Absolutely nothing, brother.
And I'm looking forward to this UFC Mexico City card. And as always, your boys here on the Ground and Pound Podcast are going to break the whole thing down. This one's at altitude. It should be fun. And kicking things off in the early prelim opener, we've got Francis Marshall taking on Erik Silva, the long-awaited return of Erik Silva. Carlos, who are you going in this one?
In this one, I'm going to go with Francis Marshall. It's actually kind of a tough pick just because of what we talked about before the show here is, Silva, he's pretty much going to test the cardio of Marshall. He has kind of a frantic pace. He's always mixing up his striking and grappling and going from one to the other and just kind of chaining everything together. But Marshall needs to find a way to get control of this matchup. And I think he can. I think when Silva's ready to go for takedowns, I think Marshall's going to be able to stuff him. But I believe that he needs to end up on top in those exchanges, whether it's a scramble on the ground or, stuffing a takedown and going for your own. I think he's got to end up on top because Silva's very active when he's on top, and he's always looking for the submission. He's always looking for ground and pound. And I just believe that if Marshall can get on top, he could control him. He could slow down the pace of the fight if he has to. He does use ground and pound as well. He is looking for the submissions. He's well versed. I think he's a purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, so he does have the credentials to get it done on the ground as well. And I just think against Myron Santos, I thought his stand-up looked a lot better. And I thought he was much more improved. He wasn't just leaping in and throwing a hook or just throwing a 1-2 out of nowhere. He uses his kicks. And I think against Silva, he's going to be able to slow down the pace on the strike. And Silva does come forward, and he is game to strike. But I think Marshall has been working on it. I think he's got a little bit more accurate from what I saw in the Myron Santos fight. And I think that he can do just enough to squeak out the decision in this one.
Yeah, I feel a little bit more confident than Carlos does here in Francis Marshall. I share the same testaments that he does, that Francis Marshall's striking definitely has shown improvements from that previous fight that he had against Myron Santos. I thought he looked much crisper since moving over to American Top Team. Nice calf kicks. He looked much more polished on the feet, and we know that he can wrestle. We know that he can take fights to the ground, and Myron Santos is known for his takedown defense and his Muay Thai, and he more than hung with him on the feet and was able to go 3 for 5 on takedowns in that fight. So I think wherever this fight takes place, I think Marshall's going to have the advantage. The thing is that with this matchup here, is Silva hasn't fought in 2 years, coming off that leg injury. Obviously, a terrible knee injury that he did suffer in that fight. I believe it was knee or ankle, I forget. But 2-year layoff for a 38-year-old fighter is definitely not something I'm looking to back here. I think he's going to have an absolute nightmarish time on the feet. Marshall's going to be much faster. I think he's going to be much more polished and looking to get back in the win column after he got robbed in that Myron Santos fight. I thought Marshall won that one as a big underdog, and I think he should come in here as the rightful favorite and steamroll through Silva. I think Silva's a guy that on the feet, his kickboxing's pretty technical. He keeps it pretty basic. On the mat, obviously his jiu-jitsu is where he shines, but I think realistically if Marshall gets on top here, he's going to land heavy ground and pound. His wrestling's going to be better than Silva, so he can dictate where the fight takes place, and if it lands on the feet and it stays on the feet, I think Marshall's going to be the one putting out the lights of Silva. At altitude, we got to remember in this fight, card can definitely play a factor. Marshall's shown that he can fight a solid 3 rounds. He looks in better shape every single fight. I think it's Francis Marshall all day here. I do not like the layoff for the older gentleman here in Silva at 38 years old, coming off of a serious injury, especially at lower weight classes. I think the altitude won't play a factor because I think Marshall will probably find the finish early in this one. So give me Francis Marshall, whether it be with wrestling and dominant position for a ground and pound or just landing that KO shot on the feet. And next up at UFC Fight Night, Moreno taking on Kavanagh. We've got Damian Pinas taking on Wes Schultz. Carlos, who you got in this one?
I'm going to go with Schultz in this one. I think Damian Pinas does have big power, but I think Schultz is very durable. And against Abdul Malik, he was able to take heavy shots from him, even though they were mostly grazing shots. Until he was on the ground, he was taking those direct heavy shots from Abdul Malik. I think that before that, he's very difficult to land a shot on. And maybe it's the fact that, Abdul Malik probably had like a little, like, he's not like a sharpshooter yet, like he's got big power. He doesn't know how to direct it exactly where he needs it yet. But that was able to keep him alive in that one. And he did take some shots on the feet, and he was able to get some takedowns, especially on Abdul Malik, but Abdul was able to, he was able to reverse it, get better position. But I don't believe that Damian Pinas is going to be able to do that. I think once he's down, I think he's going to have a hard time reversing that position. He is strong. He's a powerful guy. He does train with Andre Pederneiras, so I'm sure in his training he knows the importance of wrestling. I know that he's probably going to be well-versed in jiu-jitsu, but I do feel that unless he lands one shot to get it done in the first round, I don't think he's going to get Schultz out of there, and Schultz is just going to be all over him. He's going to be taking him down, getting him in the clinch, working him from the top position. And I just don't think that Pinas is going to be able to take that wear and tear, like just the grind, you know what I mean? Like, and he hasn't had to fight that way. Most of the times he fights, he lands one shot, one clean shot, and the fight's over. I think he's going to have a lot of difficulty finding that shot. I think most likely we're going to see just how good his ground game is in this one. And I think Schultz is probably going to get this done. Probably a second round finish, I think, because I just don't know about the cardio of Pinas, and I feel that I feel that this is going to be his biggest test so far. When you watch all of his other fights, this is going to be the best opponent that he's in there with, and I haven't really seen him fatigued in any of his other fights. So I'm going to go with Schultz. I think it was tough for me to make this pick because I feel that Pinas can just come in, land one big shot, boom, one and done. But I think Schultz can get done. He can make this an ugly fight and grind out a decision.
Yeah, 2 for Schultz here. I like his style. I think he's definitely not something that's always easy on the eye. And I think Pinas, he does a good job of, staying hard and fighting out at, distance. And I think Wes Schultz here should be able to duck underneath the shots here of Pinas and be able to get this fight to the ground and ultimately use his jiu-jitsu and his grappling. Wes Schultz is a 3-time All-American at Division III wrestling, so I do think he's definitely going to have the pedigree in the grappling. We saw him get that Suliev stretch on Contender Series as well, and he does a good job of being able to kind of, back his opponents up to the fence with strikes. His striking's a little bit unorthodox. The elbows kind of come out, charging at you, and I do think that Pinas has got a good chance of being able to counter-strike him and land a big shot down the middle here. Schultz does leave himself a little bit open, but I think the real factor here is on the ground. If this fight hits the mat, I have to assume that Wes Schultz is going to be able to find the submission. We've seen with Pinas that he's only been fighting in MMA for about 4 years. He moved over to Brazil to train at Jose Aldo's gym, worked on his ground game, I'm sure, but just a couple of months ago, him training over in Brazil isn't going to necessarily do him any favors here against a lifetime, jiu-jitsu practitioner in Schultz. I mean, when I say lifetime, I think they said it was something like 7 or 8 years he'd been doing jiu-jitsu, but still, the time spent on the mat is going to show here, I think, if this fight does hit the mat. But Wes Schultz is going to be able to have the grappling to get it there. And I think with Pinas as well, his defensive boxing isn't head movement and ultimately, kind of ducking out the way and counter-striking. It's more just relying on his power. He doesn't set up his shots very well. He tends to shell up. And I think if Schultz can just get him to shell up and, kind of have a high guard, he'll just be able to duck run underneath the level change and take this fight to the floor. And I think once it does hit the mat, Schultz is going to be able to find the finish there. I do think that this fight should be one-way traffic, in my opinion. Obviously, Pinas is always live to be able to land a big shot. He does have that one-punch power. You can see that with 7 of his 8 wins coming via knockout. But I think the questionable level of competition, along with the fact that, you tend to see some real openings and real holes in his games, I think Wes Schultz can definitely exploit. I think he's fought the higher level of competition as well. So give me Wes Schultz here to be able to get this one done. And next up at UFC Fight Night, Moreno taking on Kavanagh. We've got Javier Reyes taking on Douglas Silva de Andrade. Carlos, who you got in this one?
I'm taking Reyes in this one. I'm going to take a chance with him because he's debuting. And to be honest with you, he likes to fight with his chin up in the air. very loose defensively with his hand position. And, you know, Silva can crack. Silva de Andrade, you know, he can hit, and he's very physical, and he wants to come after you, and he wants to hurt you with the strikes. Doesn't really care to take this to the ground. But with that reach advantage and the height advantage, I'm just thinking that Reyes can do enough to fight long and you know, keep that reach advantage and keep the advantage, expose some of the times where Silva de Andrade is going to be leaping inside to throw that awkward combination where he kind of tilts, throwing up jab, throws an overhand. And I just think that that exposes him. I think that Reyes can land something off of it. And at 40 years old, listen, when Silva de Andrade was younger, he didn't have a high pace. And as he's older, he kind of still has the same pace. He throws a couple of punches and bunches, and then he backs off. And that's where he takes his rest, because for that weight class, he's small, but he does have, he is pretty dense for that weight class. So you know that he uses up a lot of gas, and he throws 100 miles an hour. And I think Reyes can come forward. He can throw some soft jabs, throw some heavy punches, throw some kicks, keep the distance, and just make him work. You know what I mean? And he could probably try to clinch him up against the cage. Anything just to get Silva de Andrade working. Anything to get him gassed, because that seems to be one way, is if you force him to fight, he tends to just fade a little bit. So I'm going to take Javier Reyes to get this one done. I think he can exploit those openings. And, you know, even though Silva de Andrade, he can wrestle, he's not going to use it because that's going to soak up a little bit more of that oxygen too. So I feel pretty good about Reyes getting it done.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Reyes here as well, but I have to say I did flip-flop on this one. I was going to go with de Andrade for the exact reason that Carlos mentioned with the wrestling. I think that that's definitely a viable option here. However, if this fight being at altitude, I have to agree with Carlos that the density and the kind of the lack of cardio that de Andrade tends to possess, I think he'll struggle here to be able to keep a wrestling pace for 3 rounds. And Reyes, the much younger guy here, you know, obviously making his UFC debut, I'm not that high on him either. When you watch him on Contender Series, his opponent Torres took that fight on a week's notice, short notice replacement, and his striking's pretty sloppy to me. It kind of wings at times. A lot of shots are coming looping. He did get taken down in that fight as well by a guy who's not necessarily known for his wrestling, so that's what made me think that de Andrade was going to be able to use his wrestling here at least early, maybe look for a submission. I think that might be live. We might look to throw that in as a flyer for our best bets that week, but honestly, I'm picking Reyes just because of the youth. With de Andrade, he tends to have very low output. And I think as the fight goes on, Reyes, even though it isn't necessarily the most technical striking in the world, he's going to be able to put up more volume. He's going to be able to fight long, you know, kind of pick and prod and win a decision here, just based on the fact that Silva de Andrade doesn't necessarily put up a lot of output. So I do think that this is a fight that has upset written all over it. If this is a big underdog shot, I wouldn't blame somebody taking a stab at Douglas Silva de Andrade, because obviously the wrestling and the UFC pedigree is there, but at 40, especially with the altitude and his build and his lack of output, it's not something I'm looking to rush to the window to bet. So give me Javier Reyes here to get this one done, just being able to poke and prod at range. If it does end up mixing in the grappling, I don't necessarily know too much about Reyes as wrestling. I don't know if Carlos has seen a whole lot of jiu-jitsu from him, but I do think that that's where Silva de Andrade can obviously have the advantage, but I'm going to say it plays out on the feet and Reyes out volumes him for a decision. And next up at UFC Fight Night, Moreno taking on Kavanagh. We've got Ernesta taking on Sofia Montenegro, and that was a big mouthful, and Carlos is going to let us know who he's got in this matchup.
On this one, I'm taking Montenegro to get it done. I think she can fight on the outside with Kareckaite, using her high guard and her side-to-side head movement. Even though, like, she does eat some punches to get in, she takes some to give some. But I think that she'll get to the clinch, try to get Ernesta's like arms kind of tied up, and as I've noticed in one of her fights, like her arms tend to fatigue in round 2. Like, she comes out as I'm talking about Ernesta. She comes out, she looks pretty sharp in round 1. Punches look sharp, they look tight. I wish she would use her legs. You know, she has a whole lower half. She doesn't use her knees much, doesn't use her legs much, doesn't use her elbows. But when she throws her punches, they look sharp in round 1. But in round 2, they tend to have a little less zip on it, and they come out a little rounded. And I think that if Montenegro there can get a little clinch going, start trying to pummel a little bit, get some underhooks, force Kareckaite to try to, you know, try to wrestle with her in the clinch, I think that it'll benefit her in round two. Either way, even if she doesn't do that, I've seen her start to fatigue. So I just feel that Ernesta, moving backwards, she doesn't have a lot of success with that. But moving forward, she neglects her reach. She neglects her height advantage, and she kind of falls forward as she's throwing her punches. So she does end up in the clinch a lot, and she's not very busy. She could throw in elbows and knees done to the body, but she doesn't tend to do that much. She'll break and then start to throw more of a box and heavy attack again. I think Montenegro does have to take some unnecessary damage, but she's tough. She's shown that in her Contender Series fight. She took some damage to give some damage, and I think she has a little bit more of the pop on her punches. I think she's a little bit more durable, and I think it's going to be a close fight just because she's going to eat some punches on the way in, but I feel that Montenegro is going to land the harder punches, the more decisive strikes. I think she's going to do a little bit more damage, and I think she's going to be the one to come out on top.
Yeah, I like Montenegro in this one. I think Ernesta's been very lucky inside the UFC so far, and I think when you look at this matchup on paper, I trust Montenegro to be a little bit more aggressive. She's got a lot of dog in her. She walks forward the whole entire time, throwing, winging punches, a lot of straight boxing approach, not necessarily mixing too much of the grappling in, not necessarily throwing any kicks, but that forward pressure is going to take away the kicks and the long-range strikes here of Ernesta, in my opinion. Like Carlos mentioned, Ernesta does tend to fall into the clinch a lot of times, kind of sacrificing that reach and height advantage that she possesses. And I think here, this one's just going to come down to the busier fighter in Montenegro. She's going to put up volume. She's going to get in your face. She's going to be constantly looking to land damage. When she does go for takedowns, she has nice outside trips, gets on top, she lands ground and pound, and she's always looking to just kind of beat you up. I think with Ernesta, even when she does fall into these clinch positions, she's not necessarily using her knees and elbows, and she's not really that impressive, in my opinion. I think realistically, the height and reach is kind of smoke and mirrors. I don't think she has the power advantage in this one. When you saw Montenegro on the Dana White's Contender Series fight, she went back and forth with her opponent there, but I think she got robbed. I think she has power in the hands. I think she can definitely win this one on the feet. And if it...
Look at him choke! Look at him suffer!
And I'm back and I'm alive. And as I was saying, Montenegro has a lot more power in her hands, and I think that's definitely going to be a big factor in this fight here. I think one of the deciding factors as well when I was doing my research here was that she did move from Argentina over to the PI in Mexico about 1.5 years ago. I think she's going to be very well acclimated to the altitude here for this fight. Ernesta, like Carlos mentioned, she looks good in round one and tends to slow down as fights go on. So all sides here point to Sofia Montenegro here to get it done in her UFC debut. And I think she should have, I want to say, a late finish here. I think Ernesta's going to slow down, and Montenegro is a fighter that looks for the finish. You saw that on the Contender Series, and I think she got robbed, and she wants to get this one back. So in her UFC debut, I wouldn't be surprised here if she got a late finish against Ernesta, who, to me, has a little bit of pillow hands, even though her nickname is Heavy Hands. But I think Sofia Montenegro gets this one done in a big fashion. And next up at UFC Fight Night, Moreno taking on Kavanagh. We've got Kris Moutinho taking on Cristian Quinonez. Carlos, who you got in this matchup?
I'm taking Quinonez in this one. My only worry in this fight will be if Quinonez tires himself out trying to go for the finish early, if he doesn't get the one-and-done finish against Moutinho. Because Moutinho's durable. He can take a shot. He can come back. As of late, he's been stopped, but he can take a few shots. And I just think that if Quinonez can get him out of there, it's possible. First round, he can lay him out. But I also think that if he doesn't get the finish, he's going to need to pace himself to get this done. And in his past fights, he's not one of those guys that just, empties the tank in the first round. So I don't see any way Moutinho's going to come back in this one. I feel bad saying this about Moutinho, because we just watch him pretty much get fed to slaughter to some of these fighters, but the kid's tough. He keeps coming back to he wants to be there in the UFC. I just think I was just kind of surprised, to be honest with you, to see that he was still in the UFC, number one. But number two, I would love to see him get a win one day, but this isn't going to happen on Saturday. So I think Quinonez is going to get it done. He's probably going to get a finish in the second round, but that's how I feel. What do you got, brother?
Yeah, I'm going with Quinonez here. I think the only unpredictable thing about this fight is Moutinho's hair color that comes to the octagon. Let's be honest, but I think Quinonez is a guy here that I think the only real kryptonite that he's shown so far, especially in the UFC, is obviously getting his back taken and choked out. And Moutinho's isn't a guy that I'm worried about, kind of out grappling him, wrestling him to the ground and taking the back and choking him. I think on the feet is where this one's, pretty much plays out. Cristian Quinonez is a decent boxer, has nice kicks. He's got good counter striking as well. When you saw against Barcelos, he had a couple of nice counter strikes in that fight. I think Ronnie Barcelos is a guy that's very still, even at this point in his age, is still underrated, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad loss. I did pick him in that one. And I do think that Quinonez here has all the skills to be able to beat a guy like Moutinho, who's not UFC level. I think Carlos hit the nail on the head. The UFC really just keeps this guy around in Chris Moutinho, excuse me. I think they just keep this guy around to be, lamb to the slaughter, and I think that's exactly what happens here on Saturday. I think Quinonez is just going to be able to beat him up on the feet. Obviously, Wellmaker was able to get the finish on Kris, but I think Quinonez, again, is a guy that's naturally a born finisher on the feet, and he could definitely do the same, even if it's just a series of volume punches. We saw that how Sean O'Malley was able to finish him with a series of volume of him taking a volume amount of shots, but I think Quinonez is going to beat him up here on the feet with the striking. I don't think this one plays out on the ground, and we're looking at another UFC loss here for Moutinho. So we'll maybe place bets on what hairstyle he comes with to the octagon, but other than that, it's all the money's going to be going on Quinonez, in my opinion, this week. And next up at UFC Fight Night, Kavanagh taking on Moreno. We've got Macy Chiasson taking on Ailin Perez. Carlos, who you got in this one?
I'm going to go with Ailin Perez in this one. She's got high energy. She mixes her strikes and her takedowns. She pushes the pace. Her cardio, she's always good in her cardio. She's very physical. And I just think she's going to wear down Chiasson. And Chiasson's cardio, her power, I think is questionable at 135. Whether it's the fact that mentally she doesn't believe in it that much and she's not as active and she doesn't throw big shots at 135, I just think that Perez I think she's more confident. I think she's getting the win streak going. She's feeling good. She's getting the takedowns that she needs. I think that she's just physical enough to push Chiasson back, get her against the cage, get the takedowns, and can call them sloppy takedowns, whatever. Like when she gets on top, she's very active. I think Chiasson's going to struggle to get back to her feet. I think she's going to struggle with the takedowns, and I think we're going to see a little bit of booty shaking at the end of this one. So I'm going with Perez to get it done.
Yeah, this fight to me is booty cheeks because I've got absolutely no interest in this one. I'm going with Macy Chiasson here just for the simple height and reach advantage she's going to possess here. And I do think Perez is good. Obviously, she can, mix in the takedowns. We know that she's a tough girl. She'll come forward. She'll wing the punches and look for those takedowns and overhands into her takedowns. But I think Macy Chiasson is just going to be a little bit too difficult to take down consistently. And I think on the feet, obviously Chiasson, we know that she can have pop, but it's more of the leverage that she possesses, not necessarily that she's got, Francis Ngannou power. I think necessarily on the feet, she might be able to do something in terms of, jabbing Ailin Perez's face off or putting enough volume out there to at least sway the judges for a few rounds. But I think that heavy, kind of wrestling approach, especially at altitude, is definitely going to be something that Ailin Perez is going to struggle with. And I think if Macy Chiasson can, defend a few takedowns or even in the clinch, just landing elbows as Perez is kind of leaning up against their legs, trying to get the takedowns, just landing damaging shots, especially with the long weapons that she has, those long levers. I think she could definitely squeak out a split decision here. And I do think that Chiasson is questionable when it comes to the weight cutting. I do think it's questionable cardio. I think her power is questionable. I think even her haircut is questionable and some of those tattoos. But I'm going with Macy Chiasson. I just think the height and reach is going to make it very difficult for Perez to be able to get this one to the mat. And I think if she doesn't, I think she's going to struggle on the feet here. And I think it realistically comes down to, can she keep her on the feet, or is this going to be a fight that ends up playing out on the mat? But I think Chiasson's going to be able to defend enough takedowns here. And like we hear Dominic Cruz talk about in some of these fights, that tall people are tougher to take down. Their legs always seem to be able to find the kind of the canvas, and I just see that fight playing out exactly how Dominic Cruz describes this matchup here. So I think Macy Chiasson's going to be the pick for me. Not confident, not necessarily going to bet on it, but Macy Chiasson, keep this one on the feet, and I think you can have all the success that you want here, and there won't be any booty shaking, as Carlos likes to call it, apart from Jordan Levitt. And next up at UFC Fight Night, Moreno taking on Kavanagh. We've got Ryan Gandra taking on Jose Medina. And boy, am I fed up of breaking down a Medina fight. But I'm going to kick things off here. Obviously, we know with Medina, he's pretty much the Homer Simpson of the UFC. If you've ever seen that the Simpson episode where Homer becomes a boxer and pretty much just, stands there, gets beaten up, and people tire themselves out. That is how Jose Medina fights. He Homer Simpsons people pretty much to being able to take over and rely on the fact that they're going to get tired and he takes over. But obviously this fight at altitude does play in his favor. When you look at Gandra, obviously UFC debut, hard-hitting Brazilian that loads up on his shots, obviously not necessarily known for having experience, having long levels of cardio and being able to be a technical striker. Coming in here could definitely have an adrenaline dump, and that has me a little bit, kind of concerned here. But I can never pick Medina only because there's not one skill set other than getting beaten up and coming back that he really possesses. He doesn't have one-punch power. You haven't seen too much out of the grappling. A guy like Gandra is a guy that's going to stand there and he's going to wing shots at you and do a lot of damage. So I don't necessarily love this fight. I don't love it from a pick perspective. I don't love it from a betting perspective. I think Ryan Gandra should be able to get this one done. He is the harder hitter. I do think that Jose Medina, there is a world where he kind of takes a licking in the first, portion of this fight, round one. The altitude gets to Gandra from, landing those big shots and kind of, overexerting himself and gassing out here, and Medina takes over. But I am going to go with Ryan Gandra here to get this one done. If he's got any sense at all, he paces himself. He understands Medina's game is that he wants to be able to get into a brawl, or at least for you to wear yourself out by hitting him. I think Gandra here, it comes in smart, kind of measures himself, goes to the body as well, and ultimately is able to find a late stoppage here, maybe from a standing TKO where the referee has seen enough. Carlos, who you got in this absolute barn burner of a fight that I can't wait to see?
I pretty much got Gandra here too, but it just worries me because, the fights you've seen, 3-round fights, in the second round, he looks a little fatigued. He didn't take any damage, and there wasn't a lot of grappling. He actually used grappling to keep himself alive in that fight in rounds 2 and 3, later on in round 2 and 3. And I'm hoping he could do the same here. I think maybe he'll be able to take Medina down and control him a little bit. But if it stays standing and it gets to round 2, he does come out, Gandra does come out, and he does throw a lot of big power shots. And he does empty the tank sometimes to look like he wants to get it done because he wants the finish. He can sense the finish, but he forces the finish as well. And against somebody like Medina, like, you can have as many clean shots as you want to. You just got to pray, is this the night that he's going to get old and lose his chin? And I just don't see that happening right now. And I feel that Gandra's he's been in a 5-round fight. He's been in a 3. Hopefully that's given him enough experience to know that you're fighting somebody who seems to be indestructible whenever you're throwing something. So you just have to pace yourself and don't get too crazy when you see that you land something that hurts them. Just settle yourself, stay calm, and look for the opening. And if it's there, the finish is there, but don't force it. And he should get this done. He looks like a smart enough fighter that he should get it done. It just worries me because in the first round, when he hits you, if he sees you're hurt, he comes guns blazing. And if you do that with Medina, you don't get him out of there. You don't need big power to finish someone that's tired. And Medina, this could be his first win, but I can't pick him, so I'm going Gandra. I think he's smart enough to get it done.
And next up at UFC Fight Night, Moreno taking on Kavanagh. We've got Santiago Luna taking on Angel Pacheco. Carlos, who you got in this one?
This one, I'm going to go with Luna in this one because I feel he's going to have the wrestling advantage against Pacheco. I feel that Luna can sting Pacheco on the feet because he does have some good snap in those shots. They come out sharp, they come out pretty tight, and they come out heavy. And I do feel that if it stays standing, Pacheco's going to give him a problem, and Luna's not going to get the finish. But if you mix in the wrestling, you mix in the takedowns, the clinch work, he's going to have to keep Pacheco guessing, and then his striking is going to become a little bit more dangerous. His takedown is going to become a little bit more dangerous because you're never going to know when it's coming. One of the things that kind of bothered me was I want to say in the PFL, the guy's name is Vilson Dragoni, and he's an Albanian national team wrestler, and he had a hard time taking Pacheco down, and ultimately gave that up and stayed standing with him. And Vilson, he can strike on the feet as well. And what I'm worried about is, well, how good is his takedown defense? Because I have seen Pacheco get taken down. I haven't seen him held down, but I have seen him get taken down. And it's by lesser people. So I feel that Luna's going to be able to get the takedowns. I just don't know what Pacheco does in those instances to get back to his feet that's going to be effective against somebody like Luna, who's a highlighted wrestler, good grappler. And I feel that on the feet, I feel Luna can sting him. He can sting him, hop on him on the ground and look for the finish there. So I can see a couple different paths to victory for Luna, and I can only see one path to victory for Pacheco, and it involves going to a decision. And I don't think he's going to squeak out a decision against Luna. So I'm taking Luna to get this one done.
Yeah, I have my question marks against Luna here. Obviously, 21 years old. He's always improving at a good gym, an interim gym. But Pacheco, to me, it's just not UFC level. One of these New England cartel guys that isn't the more well-known entity. I have my question marks. All of his victories come against very low-level or losing record guys. And like Carlos mentioned, there is a skill set there, but I do think that Luna is the better, well-rounded fighter. Four-time national team of Mexico wrestling member, or champion, excuse me. Luna is a guy that on the feet does carry power. We saw that in the Quang Lee fight. I don't necessarily like his striking. I do think that at some point he's going to run into some speed bumps here in the UFC. I just don't think it's going to be Pacheco here. I think if he wants to take this fight to the ground and mix in his wrestling, he can. I think on the feet, he's definitely going to have the harder hitting, more powerful strikes. And I do think realistically that Luna does have holes in his striking, but I just don't think Pacheco's a guy that can really exploit it. He's not UFC level. I think he comes in here and I think ultimately he takes a lot of damage and ends up getting finished. I don't necessarily think the altitude's going to play too much of a factor here for Luna if he wants to wrestle. I do think Pacheco is going to be able to defend some of the takedowns, but I think Luna might fall in love with the hands and ultimately find another knockout here against Pacheco as we did in the Quang Lee fight. So give me Santiago Luna here to make it 2-2 inside the UFC by knockout. And next up at UFC Fight Night, Moreno taking on Kavanagh. We've got Emmanuel Rodriguez taking on Kevin Borjas. Carlos, who you got in this one?
I'm going to take Kevin Borjas in this one. Rodriguez, he is a natural striker, and he's going to want to stand and trade with Borjas, and Borjas is going to touch him up, I feel, when they engage on the feet. Rodriguez is a striker first. So as much of the training that I've heard he's been doing with DC and trying to get his wrestling straight and trying to improve with that, I do feel that until he uses it in the ring, like, you don't really have that skill set yet. Like, I just feel like striking, you can train striking in the gym as much as you want to, but if you don't use it out in the fight, like, you're not going to get any better. Same thing with wrestling. Wrestling, I don't think he's used it yet. Like, in the Contender Series fight he didn't have to. But against Borjas, like, if you're going to stand and fight with him because Rodriguez is going to invite that, I feel that if he got stung, that if you're going to fall back and feel like second nature is going to be your wrestling, it's going to come off as clumsy. You're going to be rocked. The technique's going to be off. You're not going to have the leg drive to finish. And I feel that in that case, Borjas is probably going to end that fight with a flying knee up the middle because that's something he loves to throw, and he throws it all the time. And I feel that Borjas does do a good job with takedown defense. Has been taken down by better wrestlers, but I do feel that Rodriguez is probably going to struggle to get him down. And I feel that any takedown that Rodriguez is going to go for, it's because he's going to feel desperate and it's going to feel a little sloppy, and he's probably going to shoot from pretty far away. So I feel Borjas is probably going to have the advantage in seeing it coming, stuffing the takedown, and keeping the fight on the feet. So I'm going to take Borjas to get it done.
Yeah, I'm actually going to disagree. I'm going to go with Rodriguez here. I think the boxing and the willingness to kind of exchange in the pocket is going to be enough for him to get this one done. I think Borjas is a guy that can dance around on the outside. I do like Borjas' game, former dog of the week, and I think his counter-striking ability to, kind of throw that straight left hand down the pipe is definitely a good weapon for him. I think he struggled in that last fight against Sumadaji with the range, and I think Rodriguez is a guy that's definitely going to, be there for him to be hit, and these two guys are definitely going to exchange. I just trust Rodriguez's boxing a little bit more, his ability to be able to find the target. I think Borjas is going to be a little bit faster, but I think Rodriguez has got the power advantage, and I do think once Borjas kind of tastes the power of Rodriguez, I think he'll struggle here. I think Rodriguez is going to walk him down, try and back him up against the fence. We're going to see Borjas kind of circling along the outside of the octagon a lot, and really just kind of looking to land his shots as, basically Rodriguez is looking to plant his feet and land big shots. And as Carlos mentioned, DC has worked with Rodriguez on his wrestling, mostly his takedown defense. I don't necessarily think the wrestling plays out in this fight, but I think his wrestling's, good enough to be able to defend takedowns at this point in his career. And I do think, obviously coming into the UFC, there's a chance that there's an adrenaline dump here. Getting that, nice knockout on the Contender Series, there's a chance he comes in, Mexico City crowd at altitude. He could definitely come in here and have an adrenaline dump, but I don't necessarily think that's going to happen. I think that he's got an ability to be able to fight, have that kind of Mexican fighting spirit, take one, give one to get one kind of style. And I do think the Borjas in a firefight, I don't necessarily like him. I think he's better at being able to plant his feet, have a technical kickboxing match, and be able to land a sort of a flying knee like Carlos mentioned. I think when he's dancing and skirting around on the outside, I think he's going to struggle with the power, and I think ultimately Rodriguez is going to be able to get him done here, whether that be inside the distance in a late finish, landing a big shot with the boxing, or just being able to win a unanimous decision here where he's the aggressor throughout the course of 3 rounds. And next up at UFC Fight Night, Moreno taking on Kavanagh. We've got Felipe Bunes taking on Edgar Chairez. Carlos, who you got in this one?
I am going to go with Chairez in this one. I think Bunes comes out kind of hot. You know what I mean? He comes out hot with the striking. His volume's a little bit higher. He has very heavy leg kicks. He has a pretty quick, decent 1-2. And that's something that he's going to have to worry about. But I think the jab of Chairez is going to stuff that 1-2. Maybe not in the first round, but towards the end of the first round and the second, they'll stuff that. I feel that both are good grapplers. I feel that most likely this will be a striking affair because that's usually what happens. That'll cancel out each other. Chairez will start to make Bunes wilt a little bit after round 1. It'll get a little messy, kind of a brawl, and that's more in Chairez's world. He's going to try to make this a little bit of a frantic pace for Bunes. And I feel Chairez, if I have to pick in a war of attrition and things get a little crazy, a little hectic, and it turns into a brawl, I'm going to go with Chairez. I think he's going to get that one done over Bunes any day. And, Bunes is, I like him. I think he's got a lot of talent. I think he's got a lot of upside to it. But the thing is that I think he just, if all of his energy isn't there in round 2, I think he kind of looks like he's looking for a way out. And I hate when I say wilt, it makes it seem like he's like a quitter. But in certain fights, it just looks like if he can't get you out of there in round 1, he's really not looking to finish you. And Chairez is looking to finish you in every round if he can get a chance to. So let's get it done, Chairez.
Chairez, I've been impressed with the guy. If you've ever seen the picture with the string of bullets across him, the guy's an absolute savage, a fan favorite over in Mexico City. He'll probably get one of the bigger pops on the night. Very, very talented boxer, kind of a guy that wants to give one to get one again. Mexican fighting spirit, very durable. Had moments against Joshua Van at UFC Noche in the Sphere as well. I just want to point that out, the current champ. Good on the ground as well, good guillotines. And I think Bunes is definitely somebody that could test him on the ground. And I look at this fight as one of 2 ways. Bunes is a guy that has a good Muay Thai base, good striking, nice calf kicks, which definitely could be a weapon against Chairez. He tends to leave that lead leg out there to be chewed up. Bunes could definitely capitalize on that. And I do think that Bunes' ground game is pretty good. I definitely think that there's a chance that he could throw up a submission of some sort here and catch Chairez. But ultimately, I think if Chairez chooses to keep this one on the feet, I think Chairez is going to have success. He's got the better boxing, the better hands, more power. And I think here, realistically, if it plays out on the feet, Chairez should be able to find the finish. Bunes is not a guy that moves his head a whole lot. It's there to be hit, it's there to be clocked. And I think that Chairez could definitely find the button and put the lights out. I think if he chooses to mix in the grappling, I think Bunes is definitely alive for a submission. Chairez has been caught in the past. Bunes has been caught in the past in the ground. I just question Chairez's ability to stay safe and stay composed against another, high-level skilled grappler in Bunes. I think if this fight plays out on the ground, there's a chance that there could be an upset on the cards, but I do think that Chairez keeps this one on the feet, lands the bigger shots, and ultimately finds some sort of finish here in rounds 1 or 2. He's a natural finisher. I do like his aggressiveness, but sometimes it can be his downfall. I just hope he doesn't kind of decide to just fight out of instinct here, take this fight to the ground, and ultimately get caught by a good grappler or maybe even a better grappler. We'll find out on the night, but I do think that Chairez's boxing ultimately plays out here, and he gets this one done with the hands. And next up at UFC Fight Night, Moreno taking on Kavanagh. We've got King Green taking on Daniel Zellhuber. Carlos, who you got in this one?
I'm going to go with Zellhuber in this one. As long as Zellhuber doesn't give Green the respect, and throw in combination, I think he can get this done, pretty much in spectacular fashion. He's got the reach advantage, he's got the height, and if he just throws, doesn't even have to be fast. You just have to throw in combination, flow one after the other, finish with a high kick. Bobby Green fights with his hands down. He's 39. He's just getting older. The reflexes are going to slow down. And as you've seen, he gets hit clean because he doesn't put his guard up, so he doesn't tuck his chin. His guard's not up. He relies on that little bit of head movement with his hands down. And if you do that in MMA, it's going to be very difficult because, like I said, if you're somebody like Zellhuber, you can finish with a high kick. You can, when he ducks and bobs and weaves, you could throw some knees. You could throw in combination, finish with a hook, and you could sweep and catch his chin. So I can see that. And pretty much similar in reach, and that's the only time Green is going to be an issue, is because at that point, he's got they got the same distance of when they're going to strike, where they're going to strike, and he can use that head movement, and he can use that with his hands down because he knows he can clear the area and get it out. But against a taller fighter who's probably not as quick as Green, but he's not slow. He's a quick fighter too. All you got to do is throw a number, and you're going to catch Green. So I'm going to take Zellhuber here, and I feel pretty confident in this one. What do you got?
Yeah, I'm going with Zellhuber here. Pretty much the same lay of the land. I see it exactly the same way. One of the things that I think is a nightmare for Bobby Green here is that Zellhuber throws a lot of straight shots. He's got very good long-range weapons. He tends to throw everything very much straight down the pipe. He's got a nice teep kick up the middle, which he can definitely poke and prod at when Green is standing there with his hands down and kind of taunting him. And he knows that he's not going to be in range to get hit back because Bobby Green doesn't throw any kicks himself. It's all boxing. It's all that kind of Roy Jones Jr. style, hands down, rolling with punches. But Zellhuber can poke and prod him at range. He can throw a lot of kicks, which he tends to do anyway. And we know with Bobby Green that obviously he's been knocked out recently, and that chin is definitely a question mark, especially at 39 years old. Daniel Zellhuber on a 2-fight losing streak. He needs this one in a bad way, fighting in front of a Mexican crowd. I think this is his get-right spot, in my opinion. He struggled against Johnson's boxing. He struggled against the hands of Michael Johnson. But I think with Bobby Green, I don't necessarily think the speed and the boxing skill set is there in order to give Zellhuber problems for 3 rounds. He might land the odd shot here or there, but I think Zellhuber hits harder. I think the range is going to be a problem, and ultimately I think Bobby Green, we're seeing the downfall here at this point in his career. Esteban Rivovic was able to go to a split decision where he was able to pull it off against Zellhuber at UFC Noche at the Sphere, and I think Zellhuber put on a good show there and a good performance, and I think coming into this fight, he knows that he needs this one in a bad way. I think he gets this one done, and I think realistically the altitude's not going to play a factor here for either guy. I think Zellhuber's going to be well accustomed to it, and I think Bobby Green isn't a guy that can really push too much of a pace. I think it's going to play out as mostly a kickboxing match for Zellhuber, and Bobby Green's just going to want to stand there and box, but I think Zellhuber at range is going to poke and prod at him all night, and we might even see a finish here as Bobby Green gets a little bit overconfident with his hands down. And that brings us to the co-main event here for UFC Fight Night. Moreno taking on Kavanagh, and we've got Marlon Chito Vera taking on David Martinez. Carlos, who you got in this one?
I went with David Martinez in this one, and pretty much like we came to the same agreement. Like we like Marlon Vera. Like, you know, we think he's a funny dude, good personality. We did like this fighting style, but his fighting style as of late it pretty much just upsets me when I'm watching it. He's a heavy puncher, just a heavy striker in general. He's got a good ability to stop takedowns. When he's been taken down, he has been able to get back up with ease. Not too many issues there. He can defend submissions, but just doesn't have a sense of urgency of any of his fights to try to step on the gas. And by the time he does, is in the last round, whether it be the 5th round or the 3rd round, and he, like we talked about, he usually ends up winning that round. But you know, you got to win the other ones if you're not going to get the finish. And the higher the level the guys get, they're not just going to let you finish them in the last round. So you got to start winning these. And I think Martinez is just one of those guys. He's in and out. He's quick. He's quick to the point. He darts in, gets out, and he's not there to be hit. And he's a mover. It's just a bad matchup, you know, for Vera, because like that's what's been giving him the biggest trouble. And unless Vera like steps on the gas and comes out in round 1, round 2, round 3, I don't know how he's going to end up getting any of these rounds. And he's going to end up being the same way he always does in all of his matchups, having to look for the finish in the last. So I'm going to have to go with Martinez to get it done. And Martinez has looked pretty good, you know, so there's no reason why I shouldn't feel confident in that. It's just Vera's. I feel bad because I'm like, Vera should be able to get this done, but I just don't see it happening. What do you think, bro?
Confident pick here, David Martinez for me. I think this is a bad stylistic matchup, especially from what we've seen from Marlon Vera at this point in his career, obviously on a losing streak, and a guy that, you know, in the division at one point was fighting for the belt, and it's kind of intriguing to see the kind of downfall here at this point. We know what it is. He leaves fights in the balance. He has low output. He tends to just be there to get hit, and guys just circle around him, poking, prodding, picking away at him. And he's got the power. He's got all the skills, good takedown defense, and a guy that, you know, can really put your lights out if he puts his foot down on the pedal and actually goes for it. And that's the problem here. I can't trust him to do that. So give me Martinez here. You saw in that Rob Font fight, he can fight, you know, 3 rounds comfortably. He blasts kicks, which I think is going to be a great weapon here against Vera. He can, you know, poke and prod and blast those kicks at the lead leg of Vera. They're very impactful. He'll bring him to the body. He'll go to the head. And I think that it's a good scoring weapon that he can use here against Vera to get ahead on the scorecards. And it's something that Vera's got to be mindful of as well. I think there's going to be a big speed discrepancy here. Martinez does a good job of dancing around on the outside for 3 rounds. I think Vera's going to be, you know, very flat-footed, looking to try to plant his feet and land shots. And Martinez is going to be there, not, you know, basically not getting hit and poking and prodding Vera when he wants to. And he's shown good takedown defense. So if Vera does decide to mix in the takedowns, I think Martinez is going to be able to shuck those off and ultimately get back to space. And I feel confident in him here. I just don't see, you know, I don't think the altitude's going to play a factor. It might maybe for Martinez with all the movement, but ultimately Vera just doesn't have enough output for the altitude to really affect him. So give me David Martinez here to get this one done in front of the Mexico City fans. I think again it's just another stock builder for Martinez here, another name under his belt that the UFC knows that they can publicize here in UFC Mexico City, and ultimately David Martinez is going to be a household name over there in this co-main event, and I think he gets it done here against a name in Marlon Vera, who sometimes is just a scream at the TV moment. I don't know how Carlos feels, but Vera has all the skills to beat pretty much anybody in the division, but ultimately he just doesn't put his foot to the floor. So it's a shame, but Martinez, confident pick here for me. I think he gets it done. And that brings us to the main event here for UFC Fight Night. Moreno taking on Kavanagh, and we've got Lona Kavanagh taking on Brandon Moreno. Carlos, who you got in this one?
I'm going to have to go with Moreno in this one. I think Moreno's just more polished. Kavanagh, you know, he'll get there in time, you know, but right now I think he's just got some solid skills. He's a talented kid. He's, you know, it's just whatever he can do, Brandon Moreno, whatever he can do good, Moreno can do better. And I just don't see where he's going to catch Moreno in anything, whether it comes to submission or in the stand-up. Maybe Kavanagh will surprise everyone on short notice, but I don't know. I just can't see that happening. It sounds good to say. I just don't see it happening. And I just feel Moreno's better everywhere. It's a quick breakdown for me, and Kavanagh's going to get it done. Oh, Moreno's going to get it done. Excuse me.
Yeah, I like Moreno here. Obviously, the short notice replacement here in Kavanagh, taking this fight on less than a month's notice, replacing Asu Almabayev. Kavanagh is a guy that I'm very high on. When I saw him in Contender Series, I did think he's a pretty good athlete, very explosive, a guy that has knockout power, can mix in some wrestling as well. And I think, obviously, that shock knockout, in my opinion, against Johnson, couldn't have come at a worse time here. Now fighting in the main event at UFC Mexico City against Brandon Moreno. Even bigger step up in competition here. Former champion in the division. I don't think it spells anything but a recipe for disaster here. I think Moreno can mix in grappling early, wear on the gas tank of Kavanagh. We've seen with Kavanagh, he tends to slow down in fights. You look back on that Johnson fight, Johnson's corner was just screaming and yelling at him to push the pace because Kavanagh was slowing down. He has great output in round one. He's very athletic. You see with the front flips and the back flips that he can do, but over the course of 3 rounds, he gets tired. So what do you imagine it's going to be like at altitude on short notice against Brandon Moreno, who's a guy that builds into fights, that's got more UFC experience going the distance. He can mix in grappling where I think he's better. I think obviously he's got a 3-inch height and reach advantage as well that he can capitalize on. And I think Moreno is a guy where if you're the aggressor and you're a guy that moves forward, he likes to be able to get his reads and ultimately, figure out a recipe to beat you in that sense. I think Kavanagh, it's either going to be Kavanagh early or it's going to be Moreno with kind of a water torture method here where it's just going to be a long drawn out fight for Kavanagh where he's just going to get out volumed, beaten up by a UFC veteran that can kind of just pick his poison. And I think Moreno at this point needs this kind of victory to get back in the win column, obviously coming off that Tatsuro Taira loss, the early stoppage in my opinion, former dog of the week. I'm not bitter about it at all. But ultimately, I think Brandon Moreno here is the right side. I think he should be a big favorite. I think he's going to be able to get this one done as a fan favorite over in UFC Mexico City. And ultimately, that's all we have time for here. Confident pick in Brandon Moreno here to get this one done in the main event. And Carlos going to let us know what you do if you enjoy this content, what you should do.
Yes, everybody, if you enjoyed the content, don't forget to like and subscribe. We enjoy doing it. We hope you enjoy listening, and we will see you on the next one.
We'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.
Peace.